Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft from Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and this is Jon Croft, and we have Rebecca here.
Hi, Jon Croft.
Hi, how you doing? It's Friday again, and even though I don't look like it, I've been sick for 2 days. This is my second day or so of being sick. I feel a little bit better right now, so thank goodness I can do this. I
You
was
look
like,
a little better.
thank you. I was exhausted this morning. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so we're going to be talking about the cathedral model, which I hope to write about at some point. Um, and I'm working on it in my book, The Moses We Need, but I want to kind of expound on it, on the cathedral model, in like a little additional booklet at some point, because it needs to be fleshed out, you know. But how are you doing, Rebecca?
I am doing good. We did the Advent calendar
With the kids?
today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty fun. We do like a different verse every day and um they're all mixed up like from the book of Isaiah and the book of Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some verses in there from Colossians as well, so it's kind of fun. And then we read a Christmas book after after each Advent calendar day. So that's been a lot of fun.
That's so great. What a great plan.
And how are you doing? Are you any any media experiences happening this
I
week?
knew it. Thank you for asking me that. Yeah, because we always have plenty, even though we can't always think of it, like during the podcast. But as you know, I wrote like 3 articles for Media Moses in the last two
Yeah,
days while I was sick.
yeah,
Um, so I guess there's good things about being sick.
Mhm.
But yeah, there was 2 trailers that Angel Studios released. One of them was Guardian or Gabriel and the Guardians, which was really
Yeah.
good.
Did look good.
Yeah, and the other one is Brave the Dark, which is a film about kind of a prodigal son kind of story, except with a bad father and a good teacher. So that's kind of what the story is about. But we could see trailers for those if you want, because I know you saw
Sure.
the Gabriel and Guardians, but you didn't see the Brave the Dark one, I don't think. Did you?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay. Let's see the Guardians one first, because I think a lot of people are going to know about that one more. Here we go.
There is chaos in the mortal realm. A new breed of evil has emerged.
Nakanamea, those 2 characters.
They are beyond clean. And if they are not stopped, they could unravel the very fabric of creation itself. Some mortals have chosen to serve us.
Mighty God of Ara, your son Maya, submit to you.
And yet there are those who stand against it. I'm not of the poor, and I kill giants. But they need your help. I'm a gardener, not a warrior. You are a celestial prince, much more than simply a gardener. If you ignore the chaos now, soon it will be crouching at your door. That's not one of our lords. Is spreading. It seeks to consume you. But you are not alone. There is hope. I will stand with you, unshaken by the shadow's grasp. I am a celestial guardian, defender of creation, the light that pierces the darkness. I am Gabriel. May we never be shaken.
Wow.
Mhm.
What do you think?
I think it looks awesome. I love when he says we have to protect the seed. It makes me think like protect the seed of the woman, like
Oh
from
yeah, good,
this,
good
yeah.
observation.
And which is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I like how Gabriel's like, but I'm just a gardener. I thought that was really
Yeah,
neat. We tend to think of angels as all being just warriors.
right. Or
So,
messengers or something. Yeah.
yeah. So I love this idea that there's this I don't know, this culture of heaven,
Hmm.
where angels, get put on assignment, like kind of just like how Christians do. Like we're like, oh, and then God called me to Africa. And I was like, I'm the least person likely to do that.
Right.
And
Right.
there could be something similar going on in heaven where
Mm-hmm.
God is giving special assignments and missions to angels, and they're like, who, me?
Yeah, for sure.
So I really liked that.
Yeah, I really like this kind of mythology that they're digging into. And obviously, much of this is biblical. The Nephilim, we talked about Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser, and how he talks about the Watchers and the Nephilim, and
Yeah.
like has educated lots of people about them in ways that we didn't know before. Um, I guess he calls it the divine council theory. But yeah, so I'm glad that is being explored
Yeah.
again, especially after that terrible movie Noah came out, and it tried to approach the idea of the Nephilim just terribly. They were like
Mm.
rock monsters or something. It was just really ridiculous. Um, and so this is much more accurate to the Bible. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of embellishment here with the design of the creatures, and I mean, we don't know what these creatures really look like. So you're free to play in
Sure.
that little pond, like that little area, so a little sandbox as artists. And I think Gabriel looks quite good. I mean, just like you, I really liked that he is a gardener because
Hmm.
that to me just reeks of like the Genesis story
Hmm.
when God sends us out basically to cultivate a garden across the world. And we kind of fail initially at doing that, but the idea is to get us back to doing that, right? And so there's angels, no doubt, there's angels kind of almost keeping this idea alive also, but this seems to be almost like before the fall of man. I think this story appears to be before the fall of man, um, but also kind of like mythological in that it almost seems like you almost can't place it time-wise in the Bible, but it just reeks of that whole uh pre-Diluvian time in the Bible. Like Diluvian is the flood. So like the pre-Diluvian time period is everything on earth before the flood. And so we don't quite know what everything looked like or felt like since so many things were destroyed in the flood. And so, your imagination gets to kind of run wild. And especially as it comes to before the fall, you could only imagine like how things might have been or how things might have appeared to us, especially since the fall changed us physically, like physically, spiritually, in almost every way. Um, Probably more in subtle ways, but you know, I think that it's really cool that all of these characters, Gabriel, Nock, and Nemea, are all like, obviously they have a strong story arc. Gabriel doesn't feel ready. He doesn't feel prepared for this. But obviously in the trailer, you can see him coming into his own and battling with these Nephilim. So, and then Nock seems kind of cocky and self-sure, but you know he's probably you get a clip of him crying, so you know that something's coming his way that he might not have been prepared for. Um, and then Nemea, I didn't expect that Nemea would start out just totally like an idol worshiper and evil, but it kind of makes sense that you would have a character that is kind
Mhm.
of thrust in the into the evil of this society, whatever the society is.
Yeah.
Um, it does seem very pre-Diluvian. I'm glad I said that because um, pre-Diluvian, it's like you just don't know the religious structures that existed at that time, but you do know that the Nephilim caused havoc and caused trouble on the earth, and it probably was somewhat pagan, right? And so she's giving sacrifices to these evil gods or something.
Hmm.
And so I think that there's a lot to like here. I mean, it's much deeper into biblical ideas than I thought it would be, even.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty like satisfied with that.
Hmm.
Um, and the visuals are just great. I mean, he's like even headbutting one of the Nephilim in it. Did you see that? He's like
Uh,
headbutting the Nephilim. I'm like, oh wow, like this is an honest to goodness anime where they're doing some serious action,
yeah.
so that's quite refreshing, to see.
Yeah.
I guess it's Angel Studios' first anime, really.
I'm I'm pretty excited. I was just thinking about it the other day when you said there was a trailer out. I was like forlorn. I was like, oh, I wish that the Gabriel TV show was really a thing. And you were
Yes.
like, oh yeah, we can watch the trailer. So
You,
I'm really excited.
you were missing anime, is that it?
Well, it was yeah, I was, you know, I like heavenly things and I wanted to watch a show about
Yeah.
things like that in that anime style.
I do get to missing the anime style sometimes. Yeah, I know we haven't watched some in a while because, we have young kids now, and a lot of anime is not appropriate for young kids,
Yeah.
or kids at all, really. But it's still beautiful and the artwork is beautiful. And I'm so grateful now because now this is a show that possibly our kids could watch.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think that our kids are really too young to watch something like this. It's our young ones are boys. They love action stuff. I don't think they'll be scared of the Nephilim. So
Well, we were watching this one show for a little while called Runes,
yes,
which is
on
on
Enki.
Key, and it's a amazing show.
Yeah.
Uh, but after a while, it was just kind of like
A little too dark, was it maybe?
a little,
Little,
yeah, a little
yeah.
too like witchy.
Yes, right. A little too much information there that's witchy.
And I just
Um,
was thinking, like, why can't there be a show like this about heavenly stuff, about
yes,
heaven?
exactly. Yeah, you're not watching something that's stuff kind of information you don't need kids to know. The Bible tells us to be very cautious about that information, to not study the ways of these other religions. So, especially when you're young in the faith, um, and when you're older, you study them purposefully engage in apologetics, only at God's guidance. So, um, yeah, so that was something we had to keep them from watching after this. But yeah, maybe Gabriel will be a good show for them.
Yeah.
The other one I saw was the other Angel film, which is actually coming to theaters. Gabriel the Guardians is coming just to the app, I believe on February 20 something, 25th, something like that. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
That's about 2, 3 months from now.
Yeah.
Um, and then this one, Brave the Dark, is a live action film about, like I said, like a prodigal son story with a bad father but a good teacher. And so that's coming to theaters, I think January 24th, something like that.
Yeah, I
So
haven't seen this at all. I haven't heard anything about it.
let's see if I can bring this up. Oh, nope, that's my
Oops.
get a look at that beautiful site.
That looks awesome.
And actually, this story, I did this story on Brave the Dark as well. So, by the way, this gives me a good segue. Our Thanksgiving event at Media Moses commences between November 26th and December 6th. That means tonight is the last tonight is the last night that you'll be able to enjoy the think pieces on Media Moses for free. Otherwise, you'll have to be a subscriber. So just so you know, I thought I would drop that on people. Let me try to share the correct one here. Here we go. All right. Let's watch Brave the Dark.
Thank you, William. And bam. No, I any family I can call. Poor little homeless boy in the charity case, it would make you feel good. What? You don't realize that this is your only chance. Really, really, you're not a social worker. No.
You have brought him back here. What exactly do you know about this kid?
So what do you think so far?
Intense.
Yeah, it does look a little intense.
But it looks really good. Good casting. I mean, it looks like really good casting.
Yeah, they're laying out the story pretty well too in the trailer.
Mhm.
Yeah. It looks it kind of comes off to me though as a what is that one that introduced Matt Damon to the world? The one years ago?
Are you thinking of Good Will Hunting?
Yeah, Good Will Hunting. It makes me think of a Good Will Hunting story where, nobody cares about this kid and he's kind of abandoned, but he's actually really smart or useful or a good kid, deep down. And he just needs someone to believe in him,
Yeah.
and so I I think it's really good that people like Angel or faith-based filmmakers are making films that kind of like speak to real issues in the world, abandonment, fatherlessness, things like this. Um, but I wonder if they're not like 10 years too late, like this is like something that has been an issue in our country for a long time. I feel like it hasn't even been addressed barely at all in all that time. And then the solution is not to improve the family, it's to have a teacher help him. And I'm not saying I dislike all teachers. My mom was a teacher. Um, but if you notice, I mean, I guess this was one good part about it. If you notice, he had to keep fighting against his own school over and over and over. and other people and their closed-minded thinking to be able to help somebody. And so it gives you the impression, and I think that's true now more than ever, that an institution is going to keep you from showing love to people. The institutions are set up to do that now. And so, there's too many things getting in your way from teachers actually helping kids. They have they kind of have rules against that. But what they might do is actually abuse a kid, which you're seeing now more than ever as well. Public schools, I believe it's 9 or 10% of all kids in public school at some point will be abused. So almost 10%. So almost 1 in 10 children will be abused. And I'm not talking about just randomly, I'm talking about by school administrators or teachers. So, so yeah, this story I think was probably a true story from like 20, 30 years ago. And I wonder if today that all you're going to see is actually just abuse on that end of the spectrum instead of help. But I think these it's good that these stories are being told though because it makes people feel hope. How is a kid gonna find a father figure, anyway? And I think the solution needs to be something like Sound of Hope where a church decides, you know what, we're going to help people, whether it's fathering a young man or fathering, abandoned foster children, like the church is supposed to be the solution for this. And the fact that that's not happening very much is also very sad. I think that at least that film, Sound of Hope, says that maybe maybe it will be happening more again. I don't know, but movies can give you a hope, and that's good, but they can also kind of point you in kind of this direction that's just not realistic, you know? Um, and I just wonder which one this is more of. When I see it, um, I wonder which side I'm gonna is it gonna be like blowing smoke? You know what I mean? Kind of like hope, but the reality doesn't point in that direction? Or is it going to be like, you know what, we've got new solutions here that or new a reality that kids can get help. Um, that's I hope for that. I hope for something good to come from that. So
Yeah.
instead of
Well,
like
you
giving false hope,
you got me thinking about the prodigal son.
Yeah,
Um, and so maybe it is that kind of story, where we don't have a prodigal, like we don't have a father, we have more of a teacher, but he's in the fatherly role.
right.
And so I don't know who's making the film, but maybe that's the heart of what they're going for. Not maybe not a broad, maybe not like a message about what's going on culturally in
Right.
schools, but maybe something a little deeper, like you have someone who cares about you when you get put in jail.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that
Some
this teacher,
some someone you didn't think was going to care.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the prodigal son, he sees him coming a long way off and he
Hmm.
runs to go get, to greet him.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing parable. It gives you hope that
Hmm.
there's someone who is looking after you, longing for you to come back.
Hmm.
So maybe that's where they're going with it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they are. Everything else I really like. I mean, I think it's I have noticed that Angel Studios is like on the verge of like not just great cinema, but like also kind of dipping its toe into faith-based, where some of the films might feel a little faith-based, and that kind of like I'm not saying it removes the sheen, but it's kind of like a little too much faith-based from my liking, where it's like the same themes and stories are happening. And that's a lot of the issue with faith-based, by the way. It's not just the lack of the artistry, but it's also the stories can be a little weak, unrealistic, you know. Like I actually didn't wasn't a fan too much of the movie Sight. I saw Sight, I liked it. It had a lot of great things about it. Um, but it also kind of like um dipped its toe or even a whole foot into faith-based. It was very kind of like saccharine and emotional in places where it didn't feel earned, didn't feel like it needed to go there. Um, and it had kind of like some of the stereotypical faith-based tropes in there, so but it also had some great things to say. I really liked Sight in some ways. This one kind of feels that way to me, where it's like a little bit faith-based, a little bit saccharine, a little bit like everyone's rooting, for this to happen, and then it happens in the end, and then everybody's happy, like that's kind of how it feels.
Hmm.
But maybe that's because it's the trailer. It's supposed to feel
Hmm.
that way. It's being marketed to a faith-based market, but
Yeah.
maybe it's going to trick people because I notice Angel also kind of like upending the genre in some ways. And so I hope they're going to do that with this. But
Yeah.
yeah. Did you have any good media experiences this week?
Oh, well, um, I want to mention this musical artist I've been listening to named Kelsey Breedlove.
Yeah, I think you told me about her at one point.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can find her I know she's at least on Facebook, Kelsey Breedlove Music, I think. She's
Mm-hmm.
probably on Instagram too. I just haven't been doing as much social media stuff lately. But a very like folksy sound,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just acoustic guitar, but I mean, it's basically indie worship. That's kind of all I listen to, but it's really good.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Really good stuff. Let's see, her album that I've been listening to is called Heaven's Song, I think.
And it's on
And
Spotify.
um, Kelsey Breedlove, she does yeah, Heaven's Song.
Mm-hmm.
She does a duet
Oh, yeah.
with John Mark Pantana.
Cool.
Um,
That's great.
but it's very good stuff. It's folksy, but it's also very like ethereal and maybe a little psychedelic as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Is it the album with the flowers? Or no, wait. Never mind.
It's like her face peeking out from flowers. Um,
Yeah.
it's actually kind of an older album, and she has a new one, which is called Honey from the Rock
Is
or
this
something.
I'm on the YouTube now.
There it is. There's the YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah, Heaven's Song is the album that I've been listening to.
Yeah, this one.
Uh, yeah, but her newest one, I guess, is called Honey from the Rock, and I have heard that song Ravish, and it's very good.
Great.
Yeah, I highly recommend her music. If you
It,
liked uh if you liked Allie Page, you'll probably like Kelsey Breedlove.
yeah. She is pretty great. She's got a great voice, Ellie Page.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Okay, so we'll talk about the cathedral model.
Yeah, what is that?
So, you hear, on let's say Christian X, Christian Twitter, Christians talking about how to bring back Christendom, you know? And so then you get all the discussions of like, there's people like Redeemed Zoomer, there's people that are like Christian nationalist, There's reformer people, there's the trad people, Catholics. There's the Orthodox guys who the Orthodox Church has been growing by leaps and bounds now, so I hear. And a lot of that's literally from the internet, from talking on the internet, from people like discussing doctrine and all kinds of stuff, because
Wow.
people are feeling that,
Hmm.
we've lost so many of our traditions, and they feel unmoored. They don't feel like family togetherness is lacking.
Hmm.
And so they feel like they have to at least go to some trusted institution that still exists, because so many of our other institutions have proven to be failures or liars, untrustworthy. And so, um, at least maybe there's the church, and one of the questions that many Protestants, evangelicals, you could be mainline Protestant, like Presbyterian or something, it doesn't matter, but it's very common in Protestant circles to say, in these groups, not like everywhere, but in these groups online, to talk about Christendom and how our churches are ugly and how we don't care about aesthetics anymore, and how we've focused on the wrong things. We haven't focused on culture any longer. We've focused on, non-essentials, and bad ideas that water down the faith and water down tradition. And instead of focusing on beauty and culture and family and togetherness and the kind of things that make you feel whole and make you feel like you're part of the church, and you're part of some tradition that matters and lasts, is enduring. And so I was just thinking about a lot of this stuff because of some of the stuff Redeemed Zoomer talks about, who's a Presbyterian, who talks about what he calls the Reconquista. And so the Reconquista is basically where more traditional Presbyterians kind of take back their denominations from all kind of the wokies and the new ideologies in the church that are kind of like watering down doctrine and watering down the gospel and all these things. And so that, one of the subjects that come up though is that he focuses a lot on the traditional outward trappings of the church. In other words, like the church building, the beauty, the aesthetic, you know, and the liturgy, all the things that the old traditional churches really cared about and really focused on for years. Obviously, when the church had tons of money, right, back in continental Europe, they could make enormous cathedrals to the Lord, and then the Protestant Reformation happened and lots of things changed. Some of the Protestant churches didn't focus on church building, didn't focus on a lot of these things, congregational groups, Quakers, Amish people, people like this. They didn't focus on a lot of that stuff. Puritans, they didn't really. A lot of the reason is by necessity, because they didn't have the money or the ability, and they didn't want to go necessarily overt with their faith because they could get thrown in prison. So a lot of them started out with in the spirit of the early church, where you are hiding in catacombs. Like a lot of them started out that way in Europe. So this is the reason they came to America, is because often the ways that they wanted to worship God were illegal, and even made illegal by fellow Protestants, because often fellow Protestants, including the mainline Protestants like Calvinists and people like this, would would try to maintain kind of like a consistent semblance of doctrine. And so they didn't want to fall into the kind of like the trope that Catholics used, that, oh, now there's just a bunch of crazy chaos out here in the Protestant realm, and it's everybody gets their own denomination and all this stuff. And so Catholics were one of the groups who were very much like, or Calvinists rather, were very much one of the groups who were like, no, no, we care about doctrine, we care about consistency. But what that meant was they would often persecute their own fellow Protestants who held kind of what they believed to be unconventional doctrines. And so, and this kind of holds to today as well. I think many of them still kind of like, um, are willing to attack fellow Protestants over their doctrine. Um, but, you know, the issue for me is that, back to the aesthetic, right, and redeemed Zoomer, the idea is that the belief, here's the danger of this whole thing. The belief is that the outer trappings of a church and the aesthetic of the church is what makes the church what it is. It makes it more vibrant, more beautiful, right? Spiritually. And um, and so that's the danger, is that you kind of put the cart before the horse. And I think just about every Protestant denomination could agree with what I just said. I think they don't really want to put the cart before the horse. They don't want to put outward appearance of holiness above actual holiness. In fact, you could say that's the through line of all Protestantism, is to say, no, no, your status before God as a Catholic is not more important than your status before God as actually a pleasing Christian to God, someone who God's pleased with as an individual, right? So, so your inward man is more important than your outward and how you appear to others. And so the danger of what Redeemed Zoomer talks about is that he talks too much about the outward communal aspects of the church and not the inward cultural aspects of like what you're actually doing when you preach the gospel and when you become a better Christian. How do you do that? And so the inward man, is the church cultivating the inward man? Because here's where I get my theory from. My theory of the cathedral model is in many ways very simple. There is an outward objective and an inward objective. And the inward objective is to help cultivate the outward objective. Meaning, you teach that the church is about art, it is about expression, it is about action in your body, right? It is about doing things, accomplishing things. It's not just about like doctrine, right? It's about accomplishing things physically for the church, for God. But in order to do that, you have to teach that you have to cultivate the inward man. In other words, what is beauty? You have to have a discussion about what is beauty. Like how does a church become more beautiful? And you don't just follow the people who came before you. This is the beauty of this whole movement, is because we don't have a lot of people who came before us in the last 50 to 100 years with church aesthetic, we have to start from scratch again and decide, what is beauty? Why are our churches pursuing these forms as opposed to those forms? Why stone? Why not brick? Etc. And so, and also, is this a purely past-driven movement, a conservative revitalization of the past, right? Or is it a transcendent movement? And so the great thing about this is artists don't get this wrong. This conundrum of past versus future. And if you really talk to an artist who has any experience making art, they know that you can't help but do both. You have to do both. If you're going to be a vital artist, you have to pursue the future. And if you're going to pursue the future, you have to do that by pursuing the past. There's just no way around that. So what you have to do, just like with just like with the church, is you have to pursue the past, but you do that in order to move into the future, right? So it helps you with all of your decisions that you're presented with now to have a good understanding of the past and what our churches were doing. And I don't mean that just doctrinally. I don't mean that just socially or with the challenges of the church in history. I mean that with aesthetic. I mean that with architecture, right? And the technology that artists use. And so in order to understand how to make better churches, you have to understand how they made churches 500 years ago. You have to do that. You cannot just shirk by that and be like, oh, I'm just going to continue building churches as I do now because it's cheaper or something. That should never be your priority, right? The beauty of this whole thing is that it is about beauty for the Lord. Money is no object to the Lord. It's not even a blip, right? Sure, you bring it up in your church meetings, but then you just watch what the Lord does. So, money should not be the priority. What is the priority is understanding that the Lord is doing something great through your church, and he can do that if you're open to it, right? So here's what the cathedral model is. It's an understanding that in order to build up your church, to create things, you have to build up the church internally to become more acquainted with beauty inside. And when you're acquainted with beauty inside, you can create beauty outside. And so you have to raise up, like churches should have people that work socially and that they attend the church, just like so many of our great leaders, or they do Bible studies, they do great. They take care of the kids, during the service. There's all kinds of great things that people do, but we don't have people getting together, and building things. That's not very common in churches. And the way they should be doing that is literally by making art and not just art that doesn't have to meet some standard of like architectural strength, right? But architectural stuff too. So
Mhm.
there has to be an understanding in our churches that they should be making their churches beautiful. But the only way they can do that, right, is by making their church beautiful on the inside. And so that's the way it works. It doesn't matter if you're talking continental Europe in the high Middle Ages, or you're talking about the colonial times, right, when Spain was sending out missionaries across the world, and they were doing what? They were building a little chapel in the middle of nowhere, right? How were they doing that? They had a different way of thinking. That's how. And so they believed they could do all these things, and they trained up missionaries to be able to do all these things. And so we're not thinking that way anymore. We're thinking like very efficiently. We're thinking about money and but we're not thinking about how they thought back then, right? They raised up people to build, to find the resources that they need on site to build a church. They didn't send them off with a bunch of money like, well, spend that money on building your church. No, they taught them how to build it themselves with resources available to them that they could gather themselves physically. This is a hard physical labor, right? And there is plenty of people in the church, if they haven't left already, because there's nothing to do, there's plenty of men in the church who would love to do things. And guess what? Like, you don't have to go to college to do that stuff. This is a technical job. This is a job you can be trained through an apprentice professionally. It's not like, oh, we'll make an exception. No, professional people that work in technical fields get trained by an apprentice. And then they do the job. And there's churches can do that. So, yes, the cathedral model it's a big expansion of the understanding of how churches should be run. But it's a working model that basically already exists. All churches have to do is change the way they think. And some of this does involve hiring someone that I call an aesthetic pastor. I call it the aesthetic pastorate. The aesthetic pastor is someone who knows how to work with artists because they are an artist. They're a pastor, but also an artist, right? So they know how to interpret good art. They know how to make good art. They understand what beautiful art is, and they know why it's beautiful, right? So they serve, right, as like a contractor, as the in-house artist, as someone who contracts out other artists and in their church and raises up people and apprentices people. That's what they do. And they apprentice people on projects around the church and in the community, not just in the church. They serve as an ambassador to their community to say, oh, you need a fountain over there. Guess what? I got a guy. We can give it to you for cheap. Right? And so what's the payoff for the church? To just send people out for cheap and build a fountain for your community. Don't you think you should put something like a plaque on there about God in that church? So the church can still be a missionary organization in a post-Christian nation if they dig into the culture instead of doing the stuff they've been doing. If you dig into the culture, make your church beautiful, that gets attention, don't you think? As your church gets more beautiful, guess what? You're not just building up your community, you're building up all of your members to not just be better Christians, be more beautiful on the inside, but to be tradesmen and craftsmen, to make them valuable to the community. You can do that through apprenticeship. So the people in your church could be learning all kinds of things. Drywall, they could be learning stonework, they could be learning stained glass work, right? Isn't that a beautiful idea? So you could have tons of craftsmen being raised up in the church, being taught and trained from a pastor slash artist called the aesthetic pastor. And their job is to just raise up the church to make it beautiful and also to make it ambassadors to their community, to consult with, as a good artist, right, with their community to make good work in the community. They could make all kinds of art, not just their church and stonework and stuff. They could make music, right, in their community. They could put on concerts in that same little area where they made that little thing. They could make a concert there for the community, right? They could make films. I talk a lot about films, obviously. You know, films are expensive, but you don't start out making the most expensive film. You start out making little short films. Churches can do that. They do it all the time now. They just aren't doing it in a massive way to build up artists to become better artists and learn what beauty is about, as opposed to just kind of doing unoffensive, boring stuff about the same stuff that they do every year. You know, instead, they're raising up people to actually be artists. That's how these churches were made, right? Craftsmen, artists, they're raised up in the tradition to understand that a good Christian education in general includes the arts. Back in the Middle Ages, they had, I mean, music was just as important to them as math. just as important. Why do we not do that? I mean, that comes from Plato, I think. It was Plato or one of those guys, maybe the Pythagorean cult or something. But they believe they started understanding that music was mathematical, and therefore God took part in forming the universe based on musical principles. So it was just as important as science and math. Why do we not, like, can we honestly say those people were not very smart? And we don't even do this stuff. It's silly. It's hypocritical of us. So, I think that the great thing is we don't need to rely on these academic institutions that have failed, right? Many of us. We can do this in the church. You don't need anybody else. You raise up a church, and then people start coming to your church because they can be trained. You become a valuable resource to the community in so many ways just because you have training to do craftsmanship in that church. That includes masonry work, all kinds of important work that men love to do, right? You want men to come to your church? Why don't you teach them bricklaying? Why don't you teach them stained glass repair? Why don't you teach them all this other? They could be repairing your church for you. I mean, we could have the most elaborate, gorgeous cathedrals now because the resource isn't about money. The resource is about people. People already know this. They know that the people of their nation, people know this on an international level. Okay. The most important resource any nation has is its people. And that's true for a company or a family or a nation or a church. It's always been true. God says it himself. One person's worth more than the entire earth to God. But we're not valuing them more than the church building? It's silly. It's silly. We should be valuing the people in the building, raising them up to make everything around them more beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's the cathedral model. In some ways, it's very simple. In some ways, it's complex as it comes to how you're going to make it happen, right? Because you're going to need someone like an aesthetic pastorate, an office of the aesthetic pastorate in your church, so that they can kind of oversee these projects. And if you don't have that, you're going to have to, talk to lots of people yourself, lots of artists. If you want any artists to do something, you're going to have to go to them yourself and be like, can we contract with you? That's not going to be as great as just having an aesthetic pastorate who could probably preach as well because he gets to know both of these things. He gets to know how the aesthetic works in the church. I mean, what a great deal. I think it's a great deal. And it can revitalize the church's impact on culture in general. It can revitalize the church's impact in the local community to have an impact on almost every single level of the local community just by having that ambassador that goes out and says, hey, can we do this for you? Hey, can we do that for you? You've got a whole group of talented craftsmen who could do lots of things, you know? So you have a resource, and that resource can give you, can get you into places, to have an impact through the culture. So, the church can do this if they really want to, but they need to see the value in it, you know? And like I've talked about many times on this show before, the church hasn't been valuing our culture. And even conservatives, you might not even be a Christian. A lot of conservatives also don't value the culture. traditionally, they, as well as the church, tend to be certain kinds of people. They don't tend to have open traits, openness traits the way the left wing does and the way artists tend to do. But they have to encourage these people to come into their church, right? And if they come into the church so they can be raised up to be greater artists and learn what beauty is, right? Then they can have a lot of Christian artists as well. We just have to value that resource, value that calling, the Great Commission to go out to the people who we've left behind, the men and the artists who are just could be great craftsmen. They don't have to be painters or filmmakers. They could just be bricklayers or carpenters. They could do lots of great things like that. So, and then you get all those people to coordinate under the aesthetic pastorate, and you can do lots of things that way. So,
I love this idea because, churches are always, you know, doing some kind of outreach to the neighborhood or the families that are nearby. Um, but this idea is so much more than an outreach because, like you said, you're pulling people in, you're drawing people in. You're
right,
not just like, hey, we're your church. We exist in this neighborhood. We care about you. Here's a free event.
right.
Which is great. That's great. But it's more than that. It's like you're literally saying we really have something to offer you.
Yeah, of value.
And and I love the idea of like something it sounded like you were saying like improving the city or the neighborhood.
Yep.
And then there's some kind of plaque on it about the church or about God or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
I love that idea because could you imagine like you're going through this town and you're new in town and you're seeing like, oh, there's the fountain. Oh yeah, that's from the such and such church. Oh, that's nice. And oh, there's a park bench over there. Yeah, that's also from the church. And
Yeah.
like wherever you look, there's things that beautify the city that were provided by the church. So then you get
Yep.
this new concept in your mind of what Christians are like and what Christians value, that they actually want to make things beautiful and they actually want to serve their community. And then,
Absolutely.
the idea that you could, you know, get a skill. Oh my goodness. You know,
Yeah.
you could actually learn a skill in your church. I mean, we're always learning skills in our church, right?
But they're not
Like
typically these kinds of skills, right?
like you and me, for instance, we've done we've done the audiovisual team a few times.
Sure.
And I want to say like the first time I did that, I was like, I'm putting this on my resume, audiovisual
Yeah.
team at church. And it probably, helped, but that's different when you think about like the kind of skills that you're talking about, the kind of skills that, could really build something beautiful and provide something for somebody. Um,
Yep.
yeah, that's cool.
And I mean, it could be more than just a few artists, building the side of a wall in a church, right? It could be one guy is being trained in masonry, one guy's being trained in plumbing, one guy's being trained in this and that. And then they end up 2 years later, the aesthetic pastorate helps each of them to start their own business, doing that in the
Hmm.
community.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be that hard after all that work. That initial craftsman work is the hardest part of that. Like once you get like a good 2 years of like learning a technical or craft type skill, you could start
Hmm.
your own business, frankly, you know.
Yeah.
And then if you just have someone to help you with that part of it, like maybe you're not talented that way, you're more of the craftsman. Actually, you're not like into business management or whatever. There could be someone in the church to help you with that, if not the aesthetic pastor himself. So that should be what that community is about. Not just, oh, well, you want to start a business. I didn't think of that. I didn't think. No, that should be from the beginning. We want to raise all of you guys up to be great artists and be profitable, have a family, grow something in the community. And here's another thing about what you're saying about how it's cool that there's like a park bench and a fountain and all these things around the right. And all of them are advertising the church essentially. Well, here's kind of how artists think about that. We don't think about it in terms of like, oh, I'm going to put a plaque that says something, something church on it. No, that's boring. What you want to do instead is extend the style of the church into the park bench. You put the style into the bench.
Mhm.
How are you going to make a bench with such a unique style? That's why you need artists. Artists think of that. Artists think of new creative ways to put their style into things, right? And so this is a unique bench with the style of your church 2 blocks down or whatever. And so when you see the bench, you think of the church automatically. You don't need to see a plaque. You say, oh, this is of the same style. It could have flying buttresses on the bench, right?
Yeah.
It could have all kinds of things that make you think of that church building over there. So the church kind of, in a way, has to establish a style. And this is just something artists love anyway. We're establishing a style that's unique, it's special, right? It's kind of like your little you know, trademark, for your church. And there's going to be multiple artists that take part in establishing that style, hopefully. So more than just one person can own it. Like a lot of people can be involved in that because churches back in the day, in the Middle Ages, they weren't built in like a year. They were built over sometimes hundreds of years.
Hmm.
Right? So again, I was talking about the way that people thought back then that we're not thinking about, right? We're thinking efficiency. We're thinking, well, we got to get into our new building right away. So we need to build this building quickly and make steel structure and put it up in like a month. That's how we think today. It's just very compartmentalized and, like it's very utilitarian. Like this is like almost diametrically opposed to the cross and Christianity. Church is not supposed to be utilitarian in its thinking. Um, God lavishes gifts on us, right? But like, um, so the idea then isn't for us to build and grow something on an efficient level, right? It's to take our time to understand what we're building and to take our time with the few resources we have, right? To make something creative, new, interesting, powerful, beautiful, and maybe even let it form and take shape as we're doing it, right? So there could be different philosophies for different aesthetic pastors, right? Maybe they have a different philosophy in this. Maybe some of them want to establish a good plan before they start. Maybe some of them want to just raise up people to take like a year to build something, you know? And so there could be a different philosophy there. But the point is that the church builds out its like style so that it contains the community within it, not so that it excludes the community and it's all about the aesthetic pastor. It's all about the main pastor. It's all about them and how they feel about it. No, it should not be like that. It should be about them building into a community so the community can be involved in creating the identity of the church and the style of the church, right? And so if that happens, everybody feels far more involved and far more like part of an actual community, like they're cared for. They get to have their voice, even if it's a small voice, they get to make their mark on the church, you know? And as that style forms, now you've got this signature style, right? Remember that church in Spain? What was it? That artist in Spain that makes just the most amazing churches?
Are
What was
you
the name?
thinking of Gaudi?
Yes, Gaudi or
Gaudi.
something.
Yeah.
Goodness. those churches are unlike any other church in the world. They're just
Yeah.
Barcelona, I think, has the most Gaudi churches in it.
Well, he has a
Um,
church called the Church of the Holy Family, and it hasn't been finished yet.
yeah, good, good.
Yeah.
I mean, as they say, when the church is finished, that means the church is has given up. So in many of our churches that are have remained what they are for 100 years, the bad part about that is someone gave up and it's no longer growing, and there's no longer a community of artists growing that church and making it into something new. Which is not how they thought a few hundred years ago. They were thinking like, let's continue to form this church and grow this church and make it something, continue to morph it into something special, you know? And as you have a community doing that, you have continual work projects. It just never ends. And the great thing too is as your church grows and you overgrow the seams of the church, you're going to need another church, right? A church is going to break away from your church, which doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It could be a good thing. It could be actually a planned thing. And some churches are growing in understanding that they should be doing this because it's a very simple concept, right? Churches are like a family. And as a family gets older and bigger, the children grow up and have their own families. And then the grandparents need to learn to respect them as having their own leadership, their own style, their own family, and they send them off. And how are they going to do that? Start another church. So each person gets to have their own realm, right? Their own little family, group of families of churches, and they can all hang out together during Easter or something, and see each other and say, hi, how you doing? Just like families do. There doesn't have to be a breakup to break a church apart. That's kind of not very well planned out. Instead, we should be acting like families, right? And yes, sometimes families go off and they move to another state or something, and they come back for the holidays. This is how family works. And the the son, finds a wife and he leaves his parents and he clings to his new wife. And this is how a new family is born, right? So we should be respecting this kind of understanding of how family is just kind of like, pod people, I don't know what analogy you want to use, but it's like they grow their own little pods, right? And that's a good thing. But anyway, you could do that. You could take the style of the church and bring it into the new church. Now you're extending this whole idea out much larger around the community. And or they could start having their own style. That's maybe a little twist off of your style. I mean, there's so much beauty to be had here. And if we think long term, we don't have to think the way we've been thinking, which is just so utilitarian and so much about money and efficiency. You know, we shouldn't be thinking that way. We should be worshiping God in an unfinished church and just talking about, like, oh, what did you do over there? That's pretty cool. Oh, you've been learning this technique. That's great. That's really cool. Like wood carving or something. Like we could be doing so many things that people just aren't doing now. I mean, how boring are we? So like we got to be like learning all these things, applying them in real life, build up our churches, make them beautiful, and then beautify the community with that, you know? So
Yeah.
this is the cathedral model. It's about making not just the church, but the people, right? The people are the temple, really. This is the understanding the church is starting to come to, is that it's not the church building that's the temple, it's the people. But as you beautify the people, then the people beautify the church. It's unavoidable. If you have beautiful things inside of you, you're going to want to apply that to the world around you. And so there's a lot of people who have beauty, but they don't know how to apply it in their church. Their church is not open to this. And so if the church was open to it, They could say, of course I want a new stained glass window. It's not like this stuff can't be learned, right? So if you just have something like an aesthetic pastorate who can oversee these projects, you're not taking a huge risk as a church then, you know? And he serves as a go-between between the church and the resources the church has and the ideas the church has and the artist. You have this go-between who can say, well, this is going to work, this is not going to work, right? And here's our objective. And they stay on point. I mean, you got to know how to work with artists to really work with artists. Artists are unique people. And craftsmen, right? It's about the craft. It's about taking your time and doing it right. You know, it's not about like, oh, tomorrow I need it done yesterday. It's not about that, right? It's about doing it the right way. So, putting the love into it. So, yeah, that's the cathedral model. I hope to, like I said, put that a little bit in my book and maybe even have a little side book so that if people want to get just specifically how that can happen, and how that works, then they should be able to, hopefully, God willing, I can make that as well. But yeah, this, in my belief, this can bring back Christendom, right? It takes a larger effort, not just a few churches or a few denominations. It takes a different way of thinking, right? For the entire church to understand that they can be involved and can do something. And if they just see it as a beneficial thing to do in general, there's really no downside to doing this, then why wouldn't they pursue it? I mean, there's just so much you can do. And if it just continues, if you just have a growth mindset, a gradual growth mindset, then this is not something that should get in the way of any size church, because you're just going to continue to grow. So
Yeah.
so yeah, that's my spiel for tonight. And I'm working that into the book. So and I have a few other subjects too before we go fully outside of the evergreen um topics and we hit the wall, so to speak. But I wanted to say too, I just saw a video today from Ryder the Omniscient, and he mentioned our channel. Yeah. Well, he actually
Yeah.
he actually put the video of our show into his channel, which was really great.
Thanks, Ryder. Thanks for the shout out. Which video was it?
Oh, it's brand new. I don't even know the name of it, but it's about he does stuff about Christian film and like improving Christian film. Let's see if I can find it. Um,
I mean, which of our videos did he put in it?
he put the interview with Marcus Pittman. So that could be the interview itself, or it could be episode 30, I think. Okay, here it is. It's called Why Christian Movies Suck and How to Fix Them.
It sounds like
Um,
what you would title one of your videos.
it does. Here, let me see if I can here it is. I'll
Is
share
he
it.
your is he your rage twin?
He's my rage. I don't even know what that means, but he probably is. Yeah, it's an hour and 29 minutes. Wow. He really did it up. Like he really did it. Um, he was talking about how I think he was leaving comments about how it would take him a few weeks to do the video. I had no idea it would be this long. Good job, man. Yeah, he had God's Not Dead on the thumbnail and also Hacksaw Ridge. Obviously comparing them, bad Christian film, good Christian film. So yeah, but yeah, hopefully maybe I'll talk to him about this stuff. Who knows?
That would be great. You could interview him,
That'd be awesome. Yeah,
or he
I'd
or he
love
could
to.
interview you.
Yeah, man. I'd be willing to be interviewed by him.
Although the word omniscient means having universal knowledge or knowledge of all things. So,
So I got my work cut out for me. He's gonna just destroy me with all his
so
knowledge.
yeah, just be forewarned that he knows all things.
I will be forewarned. Yes, I'll be prepared. You got me. All right, you guys, we love you, and I just feel better. I'm so glad that I don't feel as bad as I did like a few hours ago. So,
Yay.
thanks for visiting us and stand up for the culture. And we'll see you guys next week and with more profundities. All right. Good night, everybody.